Okay, so today we are going to look at the parts of the X-ray beam, kind of describe the geometry going on there. And we'll also talk about what happens when an X-ray photon interacts with you and your cells, your atoms specifically. That's if there is an interaction to begin with. Some photons just fly on through the Earth. Okay. So these links are just music, not to worry about those. All right. So the X-ray beam can be divided into a bunch of different pieces and locations. But we can start off by talking about the sort of beam as a whole. And we could break it up into two major portions. You have the primary beam, which is all the radiation from the focal spot, I mean, that's kind of where it's starting from anyway, to the object, which is labeled OB here. So primary beam, everything from the focal spot, from the tube, to you. Now, the small amount of radiation that we said is about 1% or so that actually makes it out of you, which I hate saying that because I always think of the 99% that gets stuck in you. But the small amount that makes it out of you is this down here. It's what comes out of the object and hits the image receptor. That's known as the RR, well, the remnant beam. It stands for remnant radiation. As I was telling the last class, there should be less lines here, right? So this is all drawn wrong, right? I mean, this is supposed to be about 1% of the primary beam. So I don't know why there's 4 lines here and 4 lines there. It should be like not even a line. But as long as we understand the definition, right? Yeah, unfortunately, most of the primary beam gets stuck in you. So yeah, we said this remnant beam is only about 1%. And of that remnant beam, some of those X-rays aren't even as good as others, because some of them have been scattered, we'll talk about that next, and they come out of the patient at weird angles, carrying misinformation and leading to a reduction in image quality, and they're not even good anyway. So it's like, of that 1%, you still lose on some of the photons. They're not all good, for lack of a better term. It's amazing we get an image somehow, when you think about it. I guess 1% is still a huge quantity of radiation. And when we're talking about numbers with 30 zeros behind them, getting some stuff out of you. Kind of like you get hit by a car going 100 miles or 300 miles an hour. Does it really make a difference? No. So scatter is bad. One of the themes of this course, and all of radiology really, is to reduce scatter. Because when scatter goes down, major concept here, contrast goes up. Scatter down, contrast up. Scatter is bad, we don't like scatter. How do we get rid of scatter? There's a whole bunch of different ways of doing it that we talk about in other classes. Right now, I just want you to know, scatter bad, reduce it, contrast increases. So we said primary beam. It's diverging, if I haven't mentioned that in the past. It's kind of coming down like a triangle. So the point that's in the middle, that's the central ray. Can you really point to something you can't see? But the central ray is supposed to be the least divergent parts of the beam, the ones that are going the straightest. All the other ones peripherally are kind of spreading out. When an X-ray goes through the body at an angle, it's not good because it leads to magnification of the image, which is a form of what's known as distortion. And we don't like distortion. Does distortion sound good? I've never heard of good distortion. So why do we pay such close attention, as you've probably learned by now, on where the central ray needs to be pointed at? And where's the central ray? Well, we kind of make it up. We say that when you turn on your collimator, the points that cross together is your central ray. Sometimes it's two lines, sometimes it's two like rectangles that cross each other, and then it's even more fuzzy when you think about it, because it's like split the rectangle kind of. But that's your central ray, and you want it in the point of interest, because that's what you want to see to the best of your ability with the least amount of distortion that's going to come from having that central ray and that part of the beam straighter than other parts. We're going to do a lab, actually, where we do an X-ray where the central ray is in the middle of something, and then we take that part and move it like 6 inches away, and just kind of catch it with the edge of the collimation instead of having it in the middle of the central ray, and you'll see the difference. Now, mind you, I said 6 inches. If you're off by a couple of millimeters, that's why no one's like crazy, because the amount of distortion is probably not visible to you. You know, unless you took it to some lab and you did some craziness to try to see a slight difference. The image receptor is the image receptor, right? We've talked about it before. I'll save that for a slide when we get to it. Central ray, as I've mentioned, we always want to have it in the part of interest. And it's a big thing for Merrills and for you guys to memorize every single view and where that central ray is supposed to go. It's not because we're just trying to make life difficult. It's trying to make the image as best as it could possibly be. And digital imaging, while it's really good at changing the contrast and the brightness, is not really good at like fixing things like elongation and foreshortening. Right? It's not really good. I mean, you can magnify the image, but it's not really good at taking away, you know, magnification that was created because the central ray was off, or you angled the tube. So we've discussed this already. We have 3 types of image receptors. Either you capture the image on film, CR, or directly onto a flat panel detector in DR. So some other stuff about this diagram. I think it's the same exact one, but I didn't point out everything before. So we have the SID. That's the other thing you have to remember besides central ray. But that one's usually pretty easy. Either it's 40 or 72 inches. And it goes all the way. It's the one thing that kind of starts at the beginning at the focal spot and ends, it's this line here, ends at the image receptor. Doesn't take into consideration what the part is, where the patient is, if you even have a patient. We did our lab quiz. I told you to set it up at 72 inches SID. It's only me and you in the room. The SOD is a little weird. In fact, they didn't even have it on here. I had to put it there myself. The SOD starts in the same place as the SID, but it goes down to the patient, to the object that they label OB. But imagine this is the patient. So it's their hand or it's their abdomen, whatever it is the SOD. It's the source to object image distance. Go here. I'm saying it, but I'm pointing in the wrong place. Do we need to memorize that? No, we don't measure the part, really. So that's something that we're going to utilize, though, to help us do some magnification calculations in the next class or two. But really, we're not going to use that in practice too much. I mean, we have to consider how big a patient is, right? But we don't have to actually calculate their SOD. We don't take the tape measure down to their belly to figure out what the SOD. But that would give you the SOD if you were doing an abdomen. The OID is pretty important. The object to image distance is from the object to the image receptor. And sometimes that distance is very little. If this is the image receptor, this is a cassette, and the patient's hand is here, the OID, the space between the hand and the image receptor, not much. If I'm doing the C-spine lateral and my shoulder's here, now I have some distance there between the image receptor and my C-spine. That's a good amount of OID. OID is going to create magnification, and OID is going to create distortion. We don't like distortion. We don't like magnification. Maybe when you're doing some mammography work and you're trying to magnify some particular calculation. 99% of the time, we don't like magnification. So we always want to keep our OID as little as possible. Not only do they have an effect on the magnification of the image, and SID also has an effect on magnification, if I didn't mention it, but it also has an effect on the spatial resolution of the image. The OID and the SID. OID, though, is much more evident than SID in terms of how it affects things. So if you go from 72 to, let's say, 75 SID, change the SID by 3 inches, you probably won't see the magnification. If you have 3 inches of OID, you'll see it. So, gives you more for the money on OID. So, very briefly, we can almost break up everything that we're doing from beginning to end almost with these 6 categories. You have technical variables, geometrical variables, the patient, the IR that you're using, what type of processing you're using, a lot more coming up on that for future classes, and to a much lesser degree, probably more for the radiologist, the actual viewing conditions that you're looking at the radiograph. So I'll look at each one of these quickly. So technical variables is everything we're setting to create our radiation, make sure we have enough of it, and all of that. It's the KV, MA, exposure, either in seconds or milliseconds, that we've discussed already. Geometrical variables are what we've just started talking about. Our SID, our SOD, our OID, and yeah, they all kind of sound the same, but they're very different and they mean different things. And when the calculations start coming, it gets a little crazy. So you're really going to have to remember which one's which, and what one goes, which one is the numerator and which one is the denominator. When we start to get to some of those types of questions. Just look in the book a little bit in advance and you'll see what I mean. But like I said, changing these things, as well as changing the focal spot, is going to have an effect on spatial resolution. We already know smaller focal spots give us better spatial resolution. Better spatial resolution when OID goes down. Better spatial resolution when SID goes up. Those are the basic rules. The patient. Are they big? Are they little? Are they vegetarian? I don't think that matters. See the angle on the tube? This slide has a dual purpose because I can talk about what happens when you angle the tube. when you angle the two, you are changing the SID, so be aware of that. Right? You can still get 40, but you're going to have to remeasure and make sure you have 40. Try this in the lab when you have a chance. Take the tape measure when the tube is just facing the table, like in our lab quiz. Measure it to 40, then angle the tube 15, 20 degrees, and pull the tape measure down again and see where it ends up. It's going to be much higher, distance-wise. Right? So the object is when you want 40 inches, you want 40 inches whether you angle the thing or not. So why do you angle anyway? It's to throw anatomy out of the way, to sort of uncover anatomy that you're interested in. So certain procedures we angle because it helps us make a diagnosis than if we didn't angle. Throws away some of that superimposition of structures. Body habitus, we'll talk more about in another lecture, but you've probably gotten some of that in either patient care or physician. So we've already talked about the image receptor. We'll get to grids and what they do for contrast in another class. But there's a lot of things that affect overall image resolution. Film is said to have a slightly higher spatial resolution than CR. CR is catching up. Spatial resolution in DR is supposed to be a little higher than CR. CR is going to go away eventually. Image processing. Well, you've only seen some rudimentary images, but every day they're coming up with prettier and prettier pictures, taking the data and information that you create, especially from things like CAT scan, which is lots of radiation, but lots of data. So it's kind of like good and bad. Soft tissue, disappeared, gone. You can get rid of it. You can colorize stuff. You can make 3D looking at you. You can rotate them too. All sorts of fun post-processing things that you can do. Maybe one day you can even get a job where the data set from a particular procedure is sent to you and you're the expert in image reconstruction of fancy, cool looking magazine cover stuff. And then, you know, that's what you do. And then you send it back to them, looking pretty. It's when you get tired of patients. Or never get tired of patients. More and more of the systems out there reconstruct things on their own. They're getting pretty sophisticated, just right off of the factory. The viewing conditions, you used to have to be pretty much in the dark. I would take a film from the processor, bring it to the radiologist, and they were like in their cave. And it was really dark. But ambient light and those kind of conditions are really not an issue so much. With very nice, expensive, bright monitors like this, you can do stuff in the daytime. You can even have windows. They never used to even have windows in their offices. Right? Now that's not an issue. I suppose if you had a monitor that wasn't great, it could potentially change the diagnosis. But they have good monitors. Very expensive 5K monitors. So now let's move to what I had discussed. What happens when a photon interacts with it? But before we get to that, sometimes the photon doesn't interact with anything. Right? That's not on here, but it's possible that photons just go through you and through the table and down into the basement side. Mucho importante. This is a link that you need to go to. This takes us to a spreadsheet that I put together once upon a time that has lots of cool interactions, other names for those interactions. What is happening? That's kind of what we're about to go over. Where are they happening? Binding energy stuff. What happens to the electron? sometimes nothing. And is there an effect on contrast? If you know this chart, you will get some answers correct on the next quiz rather quickly, or whenever this quiz comes. I remember just saying to people in my office, did you look at the chart? What chart? Well, that explains it. I mean, technically the stuff's in the book, but it's nice. So, 3 types of interactions that we'll go over, but it's the first 2 that really concern us mostly. And we'll touch upon characteristic radiation. That's even less important for the image. Not good for you, though. So, photoelectric. Why go over this first? Because according to this lady I heard on the internet who was doing this very lecture that I had to listen to just to hear how she said it, for fun. Make sure we're both on the same page, even though I don't know who she is. Some educator somewhere that makes YouTube videos too. Just steals less than me. She actually put like copyright something on it. Anyway, about 85% of the interactions are photoelectric. And this kind of makes sense because it represents the radiation that gets stuck in you, although it doesn't really get stuck in you. Well, I could say it doesn't make it out of you, and it ceases to exist in a way. So let me explain. Let's just look at the picture. X-ray photon coming out of the tube in the primary beam hits you, gets into one of your atoms, which can be, I don't know, carbon, oxygen, phosphor, whatever the stuff you have in you, and knocks out an electron. Bang. Electron flies off. They even give it a new name. It's now a photoelectron. It should be, I just got smacked my ass by a photon electron, but it's not. So this, by definition, is now an ionized atom. Okay, it's lacking 1 electron. It's no longer stable. It can cause lots of problems or no problems with you whatsoever. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, it could be the 1 atom on the 1 strand of DNA that affects 1 base pair that does something. Or maybe not. Chances are not. What else is going on in this picture? That's it. Where'd the photon go? It stopped. It's gone. All of its energy has been transferred to 2 places. It's gone into overcoming the binding energy between the electron and the nucleus to begin with. And then the rest of the energy is given to this photoelectron that's now flying off. What I just said is represented, let me skip this for a second, with the formula right here. I know, formulas, right? I'll tell you what, we'll pause on the formula for a second. Just look at the green box. Dose. Photoelectric effect is giving the patient the dose. That's where most of the dose is coming from. Pretty much 100% of dose to the patient is coming from photoelectric effect. So again, here is your photon, right? That's this one here, right? Your photon is equal to the binding energy of the electron that it knocks out plus the energy of the electron that's flying out. So you take the energy that's flying out and the binding energy that kept it in place, you add those together and you get back the original photon energy. That's why the picture ends there. Photon gone. Einstein. All energy transferred into getting rid of it to begin with and then zapping it out. That's why this is the binding energy and the kinetic energy. Now, so hold this thought. That ionized atom is going to seek to fill its shells again. So you will have a cascading effect of outer electrons going in to fill the inner electrons. So if K get knocked out, L will try to fill K, and then L is gone, so M will fill, see if I know my alphabet, kind of get how it's going, right? That little cascading effect will, in and of itself, cause a little bit of radiation because it'll create little tiny photons, like 1 or 2 kb photons. That definitely gets stuck. Photoelectric effect, by definition, never makes it out. This was what I see. But photoelectric effect, interestingly enough, is the interaction that is responsible for the majority of the contrast, what they call subject contrast, in the image. And it's because the absorption is a little bit different in certain areas where you have different tissues, right? So bone absorbs more than muscle, and muscle absorbs more than fat, and fat absorbs more than air, etc. And the way the system is designed, it's designed so that in an area where the image receptor feels less radiation, because it's still getting 1 or 2% photons coming out in the remnant beam, and that's still, some number with 30 zeros behind it. So it's getting some radiation. I mean, when you say only 1 or 2%, it sounds like you're not getting any radiation. So, but you are. The areas that are thicker have a higher atomic number or have a higher density. So one is thickness. We all understand that, right? It's thicker or not as thick. Atomic number is, you take the atoms and the molecules that they're in, you kind of add them up. So structures that have higher average atomic numbers absorb more radiation. Tissue density is a little bit different. Tissue density is how packed the atoms are. It's kind of like atoms in steam are spaced out further than they are when you have like a block of ice. On Earth anyway. So those areas that are thicker or have a higher tissue density or have a higher atomic number absorb more radiation, allowing less to go through, and they show up brighter or whiter on an image receptor. On the image, I should say. These little staples, I think, they're so bright that they must be metal. Right? This is so dark that it must be air. And we can see that, the air between the fingers. Radiation didn't get absorbed by anything. Just hit. So it creates a darker area. The other interaction, Compton. Not as much of an issue for the patient. A little bit. I'll explain. but definitely a big issue for us. This is the reason we wear film badges. Our film badges don't pick up photoelectric effect. We said that gets stuck in the patient. Nothing gets to our radiation monitoring devices. But Compton could. Look at the picture. X-ray in, X-ray out. So in Compton, a photon comes in to an atom of, I don't know, whatever's in your body, carbon, iron, hits an electron. Just like before, electron flies out, but it has a different name. It's called a recoil electron versus a photoelectron. But now take a look at what happens. The photon changes angle. So it comes out at a different angle, and we don't like those. That's scatter. And it comes out weaker. So you can see it lost 2 kV here. But it's still strong enough to make it out of the patient and either hit the image receptor, where it will give that misinformation in the form of noise and degrade your image, or it can hit it could miss the image receptor and like hit the table or something. Or, and here's the part for the film badge, it can hit you if you're nearby. Or mommy, or daddy, or whoever's nearby holding some kid. That's why I try to strap down kids and tell parents to leave. Personally. Call me Dr. Bob. Gotta do it good though. Get it right the first time and be fast about it. So I like the fact that there's a change in wavelength, right? It gets a little bit longer, which means it's a little weaker. I don't know if they drew that exactly to scale. Again, though, same result. Electron gone, atom ionized, cascading effect, more little photons created, except those little photons turn into photoelectric effect. Little tiny photons don't create Compton. Compton goes up. We'll get to that in a second. Compton goes up when you increase your kV. Or just use more than you should have. So what's the calculation on Compton? Similar to photoelectric. The photon energy is the binding energy that was overcome, the incoming X-ray, plus the kinetic energy. So those three give you your photon, your 78. So we said that this photon loses a little energy, also ionizes the atoms, but this is the one that comes out of you. And it can come out, when I say you, I mean the patient, because you happen to be the patient. It can come out in all sorts of directions. When it comes directly back at the tube, I wonder how they figured this out. They must have had special detectors that they set up, knew how much radiation they were starting with, and then tried to figure out how they're coming from. But anyway, if it comes directly back at you, of course, in that case, you'd have to be hovering over the tube. It's called backscatter. But it could conceivably happen more often if you're doing chest X-ray and the tube is here, facing the upright, and you're behind the tube. You definitely get more energy, though, if you're right in front of the tube. Which is why you should never face the tube at people. Except in people you're actually. So in other words, I see this in clinic, it kills me when I see this. Okay. Pretend this is a stretcher. Here's the tube. If the control panel and the window is here, and the X-ray people and everyone is like here, not good. Tube is facing the patient, but it's also facing like here. Even though you're columning, much better somewhere else, right? Never have the tube facing the control panel. You can turn it that way if you wanted to. It's not good, I don't know, etiquette. Plus, it's radiation, so no good. So 97% of the scatter comes from Compton. And Compton is what contributes to what we call occupational dose. So if you increase kV, you get more scatter. Here's the image. All grainy and terrible looking because they used 117 kV for a hand. That's like triple, almost, what you should use, right? They use like 110 on the PHS. Don't use 117 on a hand. More like 60, 65. Now, if you go too low in kV and you don't penetrate the part, then you get noise also. I mean, technically, increasing the kV is better for the patient because more radiation goes through you and less gets stuck. But if you go too high, then you don't have enough absorption occurring. And then your contrast goes down. And when contrast goes down, noise goes up. Remember I said that before, but the opposite way? Yes.
So for someone to like this, where you're not supposed to do like radiation treatment, like if a hand is like 65, how much would they put it in?
Well, they might use 70. I hope that they're not creeped up this much. Right? That's some serious creeping. You know, it depends on the type of image receptor. But definitely, if you were using that much kV or even half of that, you wouldn't need 4. Probably about 2. Coherent scattering. First of all, this is only happening about 3% of the time. I like this one. What's not happening to the electrons in this one?
They're not getting ionized. I mean, they're not getting kicked out.
They're not getting kicked out. So, but something happens. There's some vibration. There's some energy transferred to this electron. Not enough for it to pop out, but enough for a new photon, not the same photon, new photon, traveling in a different direction, but, and I was nice, I don't always remember, but I underlined it, same energy. In fact, the wavelengths look the same. I kind of pulled it out and put it on the other one, and I think they match like tracing field. I'm like a terrible artist. Both my kids are artists. But I know what I would do if I was to try to make it, if I was trying to figure something out. Don't send your kids to art school. Way expensive. No guarantee of any job. Maybe get lucky, like a rock star. All right. So this doesn't have an effect, and this doesn't actually ionize the atom. This could come out as scatter, make it out of the patient, but would have a bad influence on the image, much like Compton scatter, because it's coming out at a different angle. Characteristic radiation is a byproduct of Compton or photoelectric effect. Because if you remember those two, you have an ionization and an electron pops out, right? Either a photoelectron or a recoil electron. But you have that cascading effect where the shells want to be filled by other electrons. And when those electrons fall down, they produce small little characteristic radiation with tiny little energy photons, like 1 kV. I still wouldn't want that 1 kV to touch me. It's still like 1,000 volts. Maybe you don't even get a photon. It's so low that you've gone into a different part of the spectrum and you've hit ultraviolet light, which is, it's not good, really. I mean, that's why you wear sunscreen. It can protect you from what the ozone does not. But they will have, little or no effect on the actual image. So we're on the same page, right? Characteristic radiation is a byproduct from that cascading effect of electrons filling in the shells that were vacated by either recoil or photoelectrons. In the case of in the case of photoelectric or Compton interactions, respectively. I'm on tape. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I said it backwards. So we talked a little bit about the fact that different parts of the body and different tissue types absorb radiation to different amounts. But this person, I'm going to cut a couple of slides here and then come back. I just added this last night because I was watching this video of a person doing this very lecture. And they broke it up rather nicely. Because a lot of people get confused, myself included, between absorption and attenuation. Sometimes I use them almost, synonymously. But there is a difference. And this one slide, which I stole from her PowerPoint, is really good. Her PowerPoint is one of the links I have in there somewhere, right? And she actually has a bunch of videos on other things too. So, photoelectric effect, and it kind of makes sense, is absorption. X-ray photon, gone, disappears. Right? Compton effect is scattering, right? X-ray photon loses some energy, like in our example, went from 80 to 78, changes direction. The combination of photoelectric effects and Compton effects is what we call attenuation, right? Because it's the total amount of radiation that you started with the amount of radiation you created with your mass and your kV and all that, right? Minus the combination of photoelectric and Compton. And maybe, I guess, she didn't put it in here, but I guess a tiny little bit of, what did we say was 3%? a
Coherent.
tiny little bit of coherence in there, right? Gives us the attenuation. And the attenuation, we said, is different depending on atomic number, tissue density, how closely packed molecules and atoms are, and actual thickness. Thickness is really easy to understand. That's this slide. We did this in the lab for some of you, right? We took the step wedge, took an X-ray. We don't have to worry about atomic number. The step wedge is made out of the same stuff. It's got the same atomic number. It's got the same density. It's just got different thicknesses. And we were pretty easily able to prove that the thinner part of the wedge shows up darker because it lets more radiation through. On the opposite step wedge side, where it's the thickest step, you get a lighter image. But we are not made out of all one material. We are heterogeneous. So we have to consider more than just thickness. You have to consider atomic number and tissue density. More atomic number than tissue density. Tissue density is more, a good example of tissue density is in the lungs. But I'm already verging on a different lecture, so more to come on that. We're okay? So this is just some statistics. And I know I'm probably over time, right? By how much? By 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
By enough.
By enough? I'm almost done. We want a good recording, don't we?
Yeah.
All right, so give me another minute. Not even. So the intensity of the beam, right, the amount of photons will change depending on thickness. So as a rule of thumb, right, for every 4 to 5, but let's say 4, every 4 centimeters will cause either a doubling or a halving of the intensity. So if the patient gets 4 centimeters thicker, you need to double the dose. That's kind of what this says. How would you double the dose? Either you double the mass, because that's nice and proportional, or you add about 15%, which will do the same thing. It'll end up giving us twice as much photons. So the intensity of the beam is cut in half every 4 to 5 centimeters of increased tissue. Right, so you start with 1,000, it goes through 4 centimeters, you're down to 500, right, cut in half. And this just keeps on going, right? So eventually, you don't have that many photons anymore. And all of those differences, which I sometimes refer to as differential absorption, are going to create different shades of gray. So here's a scale of contrast, goes from black to white or white to black or bright to dark, however you want to say it. The more grays you have, the longer the scale. In fact, we can call it long scale contrast because there's lots of grays. If I have less grays, I would have a short scale. A short scale contrast, less grays, more black and white, gives you higher contrast. So short scale and high contrast go together. Long scale and low contrast, just remember L with L, go together. I think I covered everything, except this. And it doesn't really matter. We can talk about this next time. But all this is your flat panel detector that's now gone mobile because we're cool like that now. And we have, they're not just confined to the tables anymore. Except you have to charge them up like walkie-talkies. And it's kind of lame if you show up and you're like, about to take the X-ray and then you ran out of juice. Now, I haven't had to do this, so that hasn't actually happened to me yet. Because I sit here with students and click things. All right. I will see you guys soon. Any questions that a lot of people get wrong, I will email in the form of a document with an explanation. So I'll take 3 or 4 of the